Welcome to the Association's Futures Podcast, brought to you by Association Activision. We ask you to join us to discuss the future of the Association's community. How can we build and focus on the many futures we will see during these disruptive times? Let's get started with today's guest.
Hello, friends. Welcome to Association Futures Podcast. I'm Michael Butera, your host. Today's guest is Larry Paska, PhD and CAE, Executive Director of the National Council for the Social Studies. At NCSS, Larry leads a team that supports professional learning, publications, advocacy, leadership, and service for social studies educators in all 50 states and several countries. In collaboration with the board, Larry establishes annual performance goals to implement their new strategic plan, provide leadership in the area of strategic development, programming, talent acquisition, membership development, professional development, alliance building, and financial performance. Before coming to NCSS, Larry was the Director of Professional Development at Southern Westchester Board of Cooperative Education Services, Director of Social Studies in Harrison, New York, and Coordinator of Technology Policy at the New York State Department of Education in Albany, New York. Larry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here this morning and to be with your listeners.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, Larry, you've devoted most of your adult career to education, more specifically, social studies. And now you have made a transition as an association executive. What has been the most challenging and rewarding aspects of moving from the classroom and administration to the boardroom?
That's a great question. I'm going to start with what was rewarding first. So I've always seen associations as getting to help their members and the public help themselves in whatever they're doing in life. So what's rewarding for us as an education association is we get to help educators help their students. I like to joke that I have the second best job in education. The best job is being a teacher. The second best job is getting to help teachers be the best they can be. But what's rewarding is that associations are a lot like school districts. They're very mission driven. They're focused on preparing, in our case, members, but just schools, learners, students, educators, the public, with the tools and skills they need to be the best at what they do. I'm very blessed that I get to work with educators from across the country. I have a 17-member board. I get to know what their work is like, what education is like in their local context, and then watch them and watch our members come together to build their own relationships, to make decisions, both on behalf of our organization, but also of our profession. And even though there are many professionals who are not a member of our association, we do like to see ourselves really as leading the way with positions, with standards, and really with the direction of our profession. And that has a major impact. So, in general, I think seeing members and educators come together in different ways, sharing practices, collaborating, advocating for our profession, that's really what feels most rewarding. And so, that it's a pretty easy transition in that regard from a classroom to a boardroom, because so much of it really in our association world is about helping people be the best versions of themselves. But what's challenging? Well, unlike in a school or an education agency, as an association executive, you are responsible for raising every dollar that you spend and save. There's no one with a pre-made budget that's ready to just hand you each year. It's not been approved by somebody else and given to you. Teaching prepares you very well for public speaking, for quick executive decision making, for the ability to collaborate and listen to many different perspectives. It prepares you also really for the political aspects of work life, not just how we all get along, but understanding the different motivations and needs of people that you work with. So moving from being a member of an association or being a a constituent or a stakeholder to leadership entails so much more though than that. It involves budgeting, staffing, managing payroll and benefits, managing insurance issues, sometimes managing legal challenges. These are not directly in a daily classroom environment. So I would say that being an educator is outstanding preparation for being an association executive, but there's not a linear path between the two. And there are a lot of skills that you learn on the job. Again, being an educator, you're prepared to be a lifelong and quick learner. So that enables you as you step into an association role to use those skills to learn quickly. But there are a lot of skills that you do need to assess and know right away. You didn't build these in your previous work, and you need to build competencies in them and seek others out to help you build those as quickly as you can.
Well, like in teaching, you need a certificate or a license to teach, and you happen to have the CAE. How has the CAE assisted you in your work as an association executive?
So that's a great question. It enabled me to be a strategic thinker early on. So I became an association executive in 2016. And within a year, I started to pursue coursework with the end goal of the CAE in mind. And I knew that there was a requirement to be in my position a certain number of years. But in education, we have what's called the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. So that's a comparable license. Many professions, again, have those credentials or designations that go above and beyond a degree requirement for the field. And so I just naturally sought that out because we have comparable certifications in education. And right away, it focused my learning on core competencies I knew I wanted to build. I wanted to build a better understanding of ethical leadership, of governance, of working with a board and collaborating on not just budgetary issues, but strategic planning and visioning. So by having the competencies required of the certification mapped out, and then being able to map where I needed to grow, it focused my professional learning. It meant I wasn't taking just random courses. It also meant that I was seeking courses from approved providers, so people who had expertise in association leadership, and that was really important to me. I was proud to receive my certification in 2021. I just renewed it this past year. What I love about it too is that it's also opened me up to meeting different professionals who are at other stages of their growth, and being able to be part of study groups or online discussions, lunch and learns, in addition to formal conferences. And the last thing I'd say about it is I encourage every association professional, members of my team as well, get the certification, pursue it. It just betters you as a person. It's like when I worked on my doctorate. The doctorate wasn't necessarily for a life in academia. It really was just to prepare me for strategic thinking, understanding the link between theory, research, and practice, just being able to expose myself to different perspectives, philosophies, ways of approaching tasks, and way of approaching things in the world.
I'm sorry, Larry. Well, one of the things I really like about the way you answered the question, by the way, is that we used to think in the old way of like terminal degrees. Obviously, you have a PhD. That's considered by many to be a terminal degree. But what you've said here is we're into lifelong learning. Maybe that's the big change that's occurred in our society. There's no one final degree. You kind of always have to be learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think associations do that so well. We really are. I see it so much among our peers across industries. We really try to foster a sense of learning is forever. And even if you're not a member of the profession, there's things about the profession you as a member of the general public can know and understand and make that information publicly available. So again, I think the transition from education to association is a logical one in that way, because that is so much of what associations do, is they do provide that lifelong learning context for the public.
So education and teaching have always been a major issue with the public and, of course, in the legislative sphere as well. With all the divisiveness that we see in our society and our culture today, particularly as it relates to the field that NCSS works in, social studies, how do you help position NCSS as a fair and quality leader for its members and the public?
That's a great question. Well, first, we are nonpartisan, and we have to ensure that all of our work is directly tied back to the values, the vision statements that we've created. So I'm really proud that back in 2018, we revised our vision and mission statements. We had a strategic plan. We revised that strategic plan 2 years ago, and we anchor all of our work from these statements. We created our own diversity, equity, and inclusion statement last year. And so all of our positions, all of our current event responses are visibly tied back to these statements, these values, our strategic priorities. And I think that helps communicate that our goal is to honestly fulfill our mission. And we are in a world that is increasingly partisan and divided, but that doesn't mean that we stray from our vision. Our vision is that all students are prepared for lifelong learning, inquiry, active civic engagement, informed civic action. We hold those as our values. So we bring every statement, every intentional work that we do around that vision. What is being taught in, for example, a social studies classroom versus what people perceive is happening based on the media or in reports that they're hearing, that's a key part of what we work to educate the public about every day. To that end, we have, for example, a professional code of ethics. It's not a requirement, like educators aren't signing this as a condition of employment, but it's a code of ethics that we value as an association. And we say that a social studies educator, by design, is an ethical person. By design, adheres to principles for ethical practice in everything they do. We have principles for teaching and learning. We have positions on how to develop state and local standards for our profession. We hold dearly standards for preparing teachers in our profession. So all of these documents, if you will, work together to not just inform our members about what strong professional practice looks like, but they are advocacy tools of our own. When we're talking with different stakeholders, if we're talking with elected leaders or members of the general public, even sometimes we'll have, members of parents groups call us and just say, help me understand what's happening in a classroom. We'll point to these as our values and what we hold dear in our profession. I think it's a good way for us to start. If you see behind me, our theme for our upcoming conference this year, we're turning our annual conference theme really into our annual theme. This is going to be the theme for our year. So many voices, many stories. I'll duck here. One world is our theme. What we want to do in the upcoming year is celebrate and elevate the power of story and the power of voice. How can we uplift and reflect on the many perspectives that make up social education? And how can we learn from the stories of others, our students, our educators, members of communities whose stories we may not have heard a lot. And we think that by upholding this value, sticking to frames like an annual theme that drives our work, these are ways for us to cut through what can often be seen as polarizing divides and just help us advance the profession. Again, our sole goal is to ensure that social studies education is available to every learner and that all of our members, all educators, are prepared with what they need to be great teachers. And advancing that mission just means continuing to push on this notion of story and voice in our work.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you about relative to this issue, of course, teachers, your members, are certified or licensed in individual states. And of course, the states sometimes have different views of the way things should be done. I'm wondering how that works for you when you're trying to deal with the big, broad issues associated with social studies and all that's going on in our environment today.
Oh, that's a great question. So there is not a national certification for social studies teachers. It is state by state. It's based on state standards. Where we come in is we have voluntary national curriculum standards. We have a framework for learning that we call the C3 framework, which stands for College, Career, and Civic Life for state social studies standards. Those are meant to help states and districts develop their standards. We are proud that this framework, the C3 framework, is used in about 3/4 of the states. And so from there, what we do is we rely actually very heavily on a network of affiliated councils. So we will have affiliates in different states. We count over 50 different affiliates. Those include local councils within states and regional councils. we work to support them. They are often our pipeline for people coming into active leadership and active roles within our organization. And for those of you who are listening or viewing, if you have an affiliate network and you may not have tapped on, tap into it, because that really is your pipeline, not just for leaders, but for people to help translate what you're doing nationally in a state context. So we will have our state affiliates, for example, have their own annual meetings or publications where they're drawing on our position statements, they're drawing on our curricular frameworks, adapting it in their local context. But then also, if they're, for example, testifying before a state board of education, they might reference our work and say, national recommendations are these, how can we adapt these here in our state? Or, nationally, we see a trend towards AI in the classroom and what that means. Let's look at building programming that's modeled off of what's done nationally for our own state context. We also rely on our states for content of our own. So we'll rely on our state leaders to help provide us with sessions, ideas, publications that might be adapted and used nationally. So I would say leaning on an affiliate network is a strong way to do this. And then another approach that we have is we have special interest groups. Those of you in associations with special interest groups, like for college faculty or leaders or managers, lean on those as well, because those groups, again, they go back to their state and local contexts, but they bring local expertise directly to solve national issues. And again, I would argue, even though the certifications are unique to each state, the problems are very general. And so an educator in Nevada, for example, learns a lot from an educator in Louisiana or New York. And that's where we come in. We come in to be a place where people get to come together and share their practices and learn from each other.
So as an association executive, versus your time as a direct educator in the classroom, what do you see as the way that associations in this environment have to move maybe differently than they did in the past? Not in terms of their principles or their policies, but, in the operational end, how is it that we make this happen so that the public doesn't think that we're not providing the highest quality education to their children?
Yeah. Well, again, this is where education and association leadership really are very, very complementary, very similar. In education, we get into the field of teaching and learning because we just love to give. We love to give to our students. We love to go the extra distance, the extra mile to help them. We love when the light bulbs come on and the ideas are generated. And associations run very much that way. I'm sure for most of us, there's no more proud moment in a year than when you're at your annual meeting and you realize, we did this. Our team did this. We brought 4,000 or 5,000 people together in one space to be together. That's not easy to do. And it's so rewarding when you see people leaving after an exhausting conference weekend smiling, with bags stuffed, with business cards exchanged or QR codes exchanged. So I think a lot of this really comes down to, we are all by design here to help, here to serve, here to please each other, support each other. And we don't have unlimited resources to do that. And just like in a school, that's where we share this big commonality, is there are finite resources to do an infinite amount of work. So
no, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So, I want to get into the resource issue, but before we do that, we went through COVID, which was a pretty tough time for the association industry and for education. And of course, I know you've had an office and now you do some remote work. So as an association executive, how do you see this transitioning in terms of the association having a fixed one place office and now being, I don't know, universally remote, or whatever we want to call that these days?
Yeah. I would say, I know there is a lot of thought given to, we need to all be back in an office. We need to be hybrid. We need to be remote. I think you have to know your culture, both your professional culture, your staff culture, as well as the culture of your association. We are planning to transition to a fully virtual environment at the end of next year, 2025, when our current operating lease is up. But there's a lot that goes into that. And, first and foremost, we were partially hybrid, if you will, before COVID. Many of our team members worked a few days a week remotely. We actually reduced our office by a third in 2018 because we had a lot of office space we weren't using, and we didn't think we would use it again. And we also were starting to be open to the idea even then of what if we had employees in other states? What would that look like? So we reduced our footprint by a third. We subleased some space to a partner organization. Some of our staff worked on a flexible schedule of being in or not because they would share an office. And we worked through a lot of those logistics. So when COVID hit, I still remember March 13th saying to the team, take your laptops home for a couple of weeks. We'll get through this. Just, business as usual. And then suddenly business as usual became, all right, who needs to bring some stuff from their, who wants to take their desktop home? Who wants to take the chair runner home? Like start staffing your office for what you need at home. And we have a culture where we are, a lot of us are very good independent workers and thinkers. We need to touch base once a day, but we're very project driven versus, we don't necessarily need to be in a workroom, a conference room to get ideas done. We can connect together on Slack pretty quickly. And so not every culture is like that. And I think as we've started to hire staff remotely from around the country, that dynamic's increased because people are starting to work with us with the expectation that they may only see their colleagues once or twice a year in person. We do a staff retreat usually once a year in person. We bring everyone together. At our conference, we'll make sure to have some dedicated time together, a social event in the evening, things like that. But that's not the fit for everyone. Some cultures really, we need to be together, or it may be the nature of the work. Maybe you're spending a lot of time doing advocacy and lobbying on Capitol Hill. You just need to have a physical presence there and your staff needs to be there. Our team, by and large, our work is remote. I think what I would recommend to people is really just assess your culture. Talk to your team members. What would work best? If we did move to a hybrid or fully remote model, are you comfortable with that? Look at your budget implications. There's no perfect mix for this, but I think assessing what your culture needs is really the best. And that's why I encourage people, lead with where you need to go. And how you're working best. Don't just lead based on, 60% of researchers have said this needs to happen, therefore we should be doing it.
Well, I want to return to this resource piece, which we started a little bit ago. I mean, associations your size regularly struggle with having enough resources to meet all the expectations of the volunteer leadership and the membership, of course, in general. So what techniques do you apply in navigating the road between member expectations, board expectations, and budget capacity?
Well, I'll give you a case study of this. So in 2018, we had just come off of an annual conference that, it was through the roof in terms of feedback. People were satisfied. It was a great experience, but it underperformed financially. And that actually contributed to a pretty significant and sudden cash flow issue for us. And so after having to do some sudden restructuring, which was painful, and it's really hard, especially when you come in wanting to serve all people and do so many great and we had many new projects planned. We had to look at furloughing. We had to look at reducing, reductions in force. So I introduced that year a method of zero-based budgeting. It's a philosophy that was introduced kind of briefly in the early 1970s. I found an old book about it, and really, the heart of it was just saying, the way we adapted it was, let's pretend we're opening on July 1st on our new fiscal year. Let's put everything else aside, pretend we are opening our doors for the first time. What do we need to have in place to fulfill our mission? And part of that started by looking at our Constitution and bylaws and highlighting what's required in these documents. So it says we need to have an annual meeting. It says we need to have a board of directors that meets. It says that we need to have a flagship publication. It says that we need to provide membership and have dues for membership. So we isolated what's required. Then we looked at what are things that have evolved over time in policy and practice. starting with what's required was really helpful because there actually were once you account for payroll and benefits and insurance and things that you just can't get away from, there were a lot of things that were required, but surprisingly not as many as we thought. And so that enabled us to create kind of these tiers of this is what we must do, an annual meeting. This is what would be nice to do, such as a recognition program. And we put the nice to do's in this column. We kind of called them suspending. We didn't say cut. Cut sounds like it's gone and will never come back. And especially to membership associations, that's a hard word because we're very proud of our programs. But by saying suspending, we're saying we acknowledge it, we recognize its importance, but it's not required to be done this year. And if we were opening, we couldn't fund it and do it to the level that would fulfill our mission. That enabled a much healthier conversation about expectations. So it was a long process. It took a lot of people sitting down saying, well, what do you mean? You gave me 10,000 last year, give me 15 this year. It required us to say, no, what's required to do, and what your pet project may not be required, but we're going to suspend it. We're not cutting it. Over time, we've started to modify it. So I do a modified version of this today. I usually try to start our annual budgeting process with, look, we're going to put payroll aside, benefits, taxes, all that stuff we know we need to do. Now, if we were starting right now, what's required, what's nice to have, what are things that we may have to put in a suspend pile? What would we need to have in place to open July 1? It's a longer conversation, but it's a healthier one because it helps everyone to see that everyone has an essential role, but it's not just let's pile on as much work as possible. That's not how you fulfill a mission. You fulfill it by addressing the core things that the association has said from its very beginning were the most fundamental things to do. Getting together once a year, having leadership, having volunteer opportunities, maybe having a specific type of content that you produce.
Well, as we start to wrap up, Larry, I have two final questions. The first one is more complicated than the second. The complicated one is, if you were able to give advice to your fellow executives, to associations like your own, because there are different types of associations, and you look at where we are in the evolving environment of the 21st century, what might be, one or two things that you would strongly suggest that the association community and executives consider as we navigate this changing economic and social time that we're in?
Oof, that is a complicated question. I will lead it by saying that associations are competing with free. What I mean by that is there are a lot of free resources out there. There are a lot of people out there who are, well-intentioned. They're doing their businesses as well. They may be selling things or offering things for free that compete with us, because why would I join an association and become a member and have to go through, the expense and the time of investing in that when I can just go online and get the same, get a book I need for free or get a set of standards for free. We need to position ourselves as the value of us are we help to shape the direction of our professions. And we only do that when we're together. The more people we are together as members, the more people see a value in being together, the stronger our futures will be. And that's why I go back to our upcoming theme for this next year. I would really encourage us all, let's focus on the power of story. I know ASAE has as the power of A, and that is also based on story, and it's based on testimonials of how associations do make a profound difference in people's lives. This was sort of a career path by accident, but it's such a logical fit for an educator like me, because really we are all about coming together and raising the importance and the relevance and the resources for our respective professions. So I would say to my colleagues, free is our quote unquote competitor or enemy, if you will. And that's also because there's a quality control issue, but we are markers of quality. And I know sometimes associations are seen as kind of slow to move the needle, or they take their time. I think that's because when you're bringing thousands of voices together under one umbrella, it shouldn't be quick. It should be deliberative. It should be thoughtful. So when our board, for example, makes a decision, I know they've thought it through. I know they've been given all the information and they've looked at all the information they need to make that decision. that needs to translate to the general public as trust. Trust that an association has done its homework, done its diligence, and is thoughtful when it comes out with what it needs. But I just encourage my colleagues, let's build the power of story together about how we provide a value that free can never replace.
I'd say that's a good answer to a complicated question.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
So here's the easy one, Larry. If
Oh.
people want to get in touch with you or with NCSS, how would they be able to do that?
We're very easy to find, socialstudies.org. I'm also at Lawrence Paska on X, and at NCSS Network. If you're looking for us on X, we're on LinkedIn as well, Instagram, Facebook. But do visit us at socialstudies.org, learn more about us. I'm always happy to connect with anyone who's listening or viewing this to just talk associations, talk education. We love talking social studies, especially, but I'm happy to talk with any of you just about, getting ideas with you about how we continue to grow our associations. And for those of you who are either new in an association executive role, or if you're planning to be an association executive in the future, I want to go back to Michael's earlier question. Pursue the CAE. Focus yourself on being a lifelong learner. I mean, yes, pick up any book you can find, but the CAE truly was life-changing for me. It really anchored me, and it helps me to, I think, focus every day on what are the competencies I need to keep honing as an association leader, because it is a lifelong journey. There's no point at which you reach it and you're it and that's it. It is a lifelong journey. So I encourage all of you, pursue that CAE and join different study groups and online groups that you can collaborate with peers on and just get better at learning together.
Well, Larry, I want to thank you, wish you and NCSS great success as the future unfolds. And again, thanks very much for being a part of our podcast today. Friends, Association Futures is a forward-thinking podcast that delves into the future of associations. Our mission is to help associations and executives navigate the ever-evolving landscape by anticipating trends, avoiding short-sighted decisions, and ensuring long-term success. Tune in again in 2 weeks to gain insights, foresight, and actionable strategies to help your association on its journey. Have a great day, friends.